Claude Opus 4.8 hits 99.2% recall at 1 million tokens, and Gemini 3.6 Flash has 0 published numbers to match it. That's the only hard head-to-head stat we've got, and it tells you everything about why this comparison is so frustrating. Both models dropped recently, and people keep asking which one to actually use, so I went through official docs, community benchmarks, and blog tests, comparing Gemini 3.6 Flash versus Claude Opus 4.8 across 5 real dimensions. No vendor money, only verified sources. And honestly, what I found kind of flipped my expectations, because the model with the flashier benchmark numbers might not be the one you should be paying for. And it comes down to one thing that most people aren't even checking before they pick. Alright, so this comparison is for you if you're picking an API model for a real workflow, whether that's a coding agent, a research tool, or something that needs to chew through long documents without losing the thread, because getting this wrong means paying for speed you don't need, or missing recall that your use case absolutely requires. Okay, so test 1. Long context recall. You feed a model a 1,000,000 token document and ask it to find one specific fact buried in there. And if it misses it, your whole pipeline gives the wrong answer, and you might not even know until something breaks downstream. That's the failure mode we're looking at here. What surprised me is how lopsided this data actually is. I looked at every source I could find, and Claude Opus 4.8 has a community benchmark showing 99.2% needle in a haystack recall at 1 million tokens, while Gemini 3.6 Flash has no published figure at all. So on screen, you're seeing one number and one blank. I was expecting at least some Gemini data to show up here, and honestly, nothing came through. So this one's a tie by default. You can't score what you can't see, and that's the whole problem. Scoreboard sits at Gemini 3.60, Claude 0, one tied so far. Now, test 2, real-time web search. If your model can't pull live data, it'll confidently give you information that's 6 months out of date, and you won't catch it until a client does, which is a real cost, not just an annoyance. So both models have native web search, which is pretty interesting. Gemini 3.6 Flash uses Google search grounding. Claude Opus 4.8 uses Bing with citations, and both give you source links. The one thing I noticed that's a little different. Claude also does native image search, and Gemini's image search capability just isn't specified anywhere. Take this with a grain of salt, because the search engine difference might matter more than it looks. Google search grounding versus Bing citations isn't really the same thing, and quality probably varies by query type, but there's no head-to-head quality test here, so I can't tell you one is definitively better. I was expecting one to clearly pull ahead on search, but they're basically at feature parity, and Claude's native image search is a small edge that isn't enough to call a winner without quality data. Running tally, Gemini 3.6, still 0, Claude, still 0. Now 2 tests tied. Okay, test 3. Coding benchmarks. A model that scores badly on real coding tasks doesn't just write slow code, it writes broken code that compiles fine and fails in production, and debugging that costs you hours you didn't budget for. What I found here is pretty one-sided. Gemini 3.6 Flash has actual numbers. 58.7% on SWI Bench Pro, 63.9% on MLE Bench, 78.0% on Terminal Bench 2.1, all from the Google blog and community sources. Claude Opus 4.8. No published coding benchmark scores anywhere I could find, and you're seeing that gap on screen right now. Honestly, I went in expecting Claude to at least have some numbers here, and it just doesn't, so this is another tie by default. Same situation as long context, because you can't compare one number against nothing. That brings the running count to Gemini 3.60, Claude 0, 3 tests tied. So, test 4. API pricing. If you're running a production app and you can't calculate your per request cost upfront, you're going to get a surprise bill at the end of the month, and pricing transparency isn't a nice to have when you're committing to a model. Here's what we got. Gemini 3.6 Flash is $1.50 per million input tokens, $7.50 per million output tokens, and $0.15 for cached input, clean, published, easy to model. Claude Opus 4.8 pricing, I couldn't find it anywhere in the sources I checked, which is a real problem if you're trying to plan costs. I was expecting both models to have public pricing by now, and Claude just doesn't show up in the data, so this one's a tie on the scoreboard. But in practice, Gemini's transparency is a real advantage if you need to budget. 4 tests in, Gemini 3.60, Claude 0, 4 tied. Last one, Test 5. Token generation speed. Slow output is a latency tax on every single request your app makes. And if you're running real-time chat or an agent loop that calls the model dozens of times, a sluggish model can make your whole product feel broken, even when the answers are correct. Alright, so I went looking for speed numbers on both models, and Gemini 3.6 flash clocks in at 304 tokens per second in a community test, which is genuinely fast, while Claude Opus 4.8 has no reported speed figure at all. So bear in mind the Gemini number is directional, not an official Google stat. Same story as pricing and coding. I expected at least one published speed stat for Claude, and there's nothing, so tie again, because we can't score a blank. Final tally across all 5 tests. Gemini 3.6 0 wins, Claude 0 wins, all 5 tied. Okay, so where does Gemini 3.6 Flash actually pull ahead? 3 things. Public API pricing at $1.50 input, $7.50 output per million tokens, so you can budget this today. A real speed number, 304 tokens per second, that you can actually plan around. And published coding benchmarks, 58.7% SWE Bench Pro, 63.9% MLA Bench. Gemini shows its work. Now where does Claude Opus 4.8 win? Also 3 things. That 99.2% needle in a haystack score on a million token document is the strongest long context number in this whole comparison. Web search comes with native image search on every plan, including the free tier. And Claude Code is a dedicated coding tool built on top of that long context strength. I went in expecting a clear winner, and what I got was a data gap problem. So here's the decision rule. Need predictable costs and fast output for a production API. Gemini 3.6 Flash, $1.50 per million tokens, 304 tokens per second, benchmarks on record. Need a model that won't lose the thread in a million token document? Claude Opus 4.8, 99.2% recall is a number that's genuinely hard to ignore.